Hello and welcome to this video series, Identity Manager Update 9.3. This video series out of 5 videos is part of the playlist What's New in the Identity Manager just here on YouTube. We are a little bit late with that video series, especially if you think about that the Identity Manager 9.3 was released end last year. The reason for that is there was some considerations with other events, for example like our Unite event, where similar content was presented. Now, this is the last point where we just publish the new features of our Identity Manager 9.3 product. What you need to know. First of all, Identity Manager 9.3 is not a typical feature release. It is a release that just contains a lot of features as well, but the majority of work was spent into the move from .NET Framework to .NET 8. This is what we will talk about more than one time. Secondly, this video series is of course something for experts. That means if you are a beginner with the Identity Manager, there might be some other offerings that will help you more just to learn about the Identity Manager. In this video series, we are talking very fastly about a lot of features and of course improvements of features which are already implemented in the Identity Manager, and without a professional understanding of the Identity Manager it might be hard to follow. Lastly, this video series is just public viewing. We do have as well a learning path where you can follow and get updates to the Identity Manager 9.3 together with a certification in a badge. This is possible for partners in our Litmus LMS systems. Please look into that. If you have attended already this Litmus learning path, this video series will not show you a lot of new things. It will just show you the same content again. And now, for all the others who are interested in the Identity Manager and the update to version 9.3, please just follow me and I will show you everything which is new in this version. Let's start like always with our prerequisites and requirement changers. First, the database requirements. You need a SQL Server 2022 or later, and of course, like always, the latest CU. What you have to configure for your database is a database compatibility level of 160. Additionally to that, for this release, as well Windows Server 2025 is supported. All other prerequisites like supported are prerequisites you easily can find in the installation prerequisites of the Identity Manager manual or in the release notes. However, let me take that as an opportunity to show you, of course, an additional feature which is not Identity Manager related at all. And this is our One Identity documentation page. If we just jump to that documentation page, the one or the other will just struggle and say, hey, that is a look and feel I have never seen. And that's not only because of the black color in the background. Of course, the black color, this is my good because I like black backgrounds, but the documentation page for all of you should look pretty different. Reason for that? It is a complete new platform containing all our main manuals. Safeguard, One Login, active roles, syslog-ng, and of course the Identity Manager. You will find everything there. User experience, super improved. Search capabilities, much better than before. You can easily see that there. I will show you many times the documentation page during that training, and for now, you know this exists. Back to our presentation, we have a look at the installation prerequisites. I will just click on that specific link for you and you will see the documentation page again, this time with the installation prerequisites. You see, just very short, the reason for it is the main header. You see on the left hand side a lot of sub entries which are showing different prerequisites for different parts of the product. For example, if you want to host your identity manager somewhere on a SQL database or something else, an Azure database, there are some prerequisites to see. If you are more interested in a standard installation on premise, then you can find your installations there. Again, all of that reflects the complete manual of the identity manager, in this case 9.3, as you can see on the version, but if you flip that down you will easily see some other versions are available as well. Not that much than you might know. Reason for that is this platform is pretty new and only the new manuals and the last current manuals are reflected. For all the other stuff exists the old platform as well. Why we decided to move from .NET Framework to .NET 8. The answer is quite important to understand what we did in version Identity Manager 9.3. Microsoft decided a while ago that they don't want to invest more time into .NET Framework. The reason for that is that .NET Framework was created with and for Windows. So all the components around .NET Framework and the framework components itself are made for the operating system Windows and help developers to work with Windows components. Yes, of course, there are some components which don't need Windows as well, but they are part of the integrated .NET Framework. With creating the Entra ID space and with the interest of Microsoft to become more platform independent, they separated all of these Windows-based components from the REST functionality, and this is .NET 8. .NET 8 was made to be installed on different operating systems and to be used on different platforms like macOS, Windows, Linux, and so on. The interesting thing here is that, of course, in .NET 8 you can also use Windows components. You have only to integrate them into the .NET 8 to use them. If you do something like that in your development projects, then such a project could not be compiled on a Linux system because the compiler will let you know this is the wrong operating system. But if you use core.NET, then you are more or less platform independent. And that, of course, is good from a web perspective, and it is, of course, very good from a container perspective. Because as we all know, for example, Docker container using Linux are much smaller than Docker container using Windows. However, if you try to use .NET 8, this needs to be installed on the platform where you want to run something. You have always to install, of course, the runtime. The runtime is the minimum installation, and it is good for client tools, for example, or for the job service. If you just want to develop scripts or you want to compile your database, which is part of developing scripts and something like that in the Identity Manager, then you need the .NET 8 SDK. And the good message is, if you install .NET 8 SDK, you will automatically get the runtime included, and with that, everything is fine. In these cases where you want to run web services, the application server from an Identity Manager perspective or the API server, then you need the .NET 8 ASP.NET Core Runtime Hosting Bundle, which is a very specific thing just to make this work. With that said, let's have a look at the other main thing we typically do with our database during migration or doing our customization. And that is, we compile our database. Everybody of us knows compiling the database means to compile code stored in the Identity Manager SQL database. With using .NET 8, there are some changes as well. First, the easy changes. If you look at that screenshot on the right side, you see the number of selectable options for your compiler decreased enormously. There is nearly nothing you can check. The reason for that is that we are moved away from a lot of different assemblies because .NET supports that in a different way than .NET Framework, and so compiling the database is much easier. Nothing to select or nearly nothing to select. You just compile the database. The one or the other will moan and say, oh gosh, that means we have now long compilation times to survive, but that's of course not necessary, because with moving to .NET 8, compiling the database is as fast as it never was before. However, with .NET 8, all the dependencies to other DLLs are something which are not that easy than in .NET Framework before. We are now using and supporting NuGet packages, and these NuGet packages allow us to handle dependencies. Because of that, the compiler is the only tool that takes completely care on all of these references between the different DLLs stored in NuGet packages, because there the information is stored. We will talk about that as well the one or the other time. Two more things to know. One thing is that as a prerequisites for the database compiler, as mentioned, the .NET 8 SDK is necessary, and with that you are safe for your client tools. Continuing with the database compilation process, the question is how the whole thing works. New in Identity Manager 9.3 is that from now on, for compiling the database, the Identity Manager just generates a Visual Studio solution to compile. That is just to handle all of these different prerequisites so that the compiler can download the right NuGet packages so that a compilation can completely happen. The complete solution is compiled, in difference to before, where we have only compiled parts of it, depending on your configuration. And that is, by the way, the reason that documents why we don't have all these compilations options that we had before. What the compiler is doing, it uploads, of course, the compiled assemblies, and if there are references or dependencies on other files, these files will be downloaded, the NuGet packages will be downloaded, and all of these necessary assemblies will be written to the database as well. Therefore, there are some changes in QBM file revision. We will talk about them in detail a little bit later. But one thing is very clear, in difference to the past, where it was necessary to upload each specific DLL to be used which was not part of the Identity Manager installation, now using the NuGet packages, this upload will happen automatically. From my perspective, a very nice, comfortable improvement. And now let's talk about deprecated features. That means in this case end of life features. What is not supported any longer in the Identity Manager 9.3? Let me say it that way. A lot of these things which are not available any longer are things which are incompatible with .NET 8, and so here .NET 8 plays a key role again. First of all, everything that has to do with Web Designer and Web Designer based applications. There is no way in Identity Manager 9.3 to run a Web Designer front end. It is completely independent if that front end is already compiled in the previous database version and gets migrated or not. It is not able to run any longer, and the reason for is that every support for .NET Framework is missing. And that is because .NET 8 plays now the role of the old framework. Additionally to that, things like support for Exchange 2013, SharePoint 2013 or Active Role 7x is of course something which is not longer available. Reason for that is incompatibility with the necessary process steps and with the necessary components with .NET 8 as well. Another feature, which is of course not related to .NET 8 and is something which is not available any longer, are of course everything what we know as job gate communication. Very in the past, people like me can remember that, we had a specific technology implemented in the server service configuration, which was allowing to send jobs around using files or HTTP or FTP or something else. This is now in the meantime completely deprecated, especially because we do have a REST-based application server, and that helps the transfer during specific firewall landscapes or something like that. Because of that, in Identity Manager 9.3, every of these job providers are now removed. This considers the FTP job gate, the HTTP job gate, and the file job gate. For all the people, does have them somewhere used. I don't think so. We have customers doing that. But however, if there are customers outside using that, please just use the app server jobs provider instead. With .NET 8 support, all 32-bit tasks are gone. And that means all the tasks you know from your process engine development are not available any longer. Process steps like ad hoc projection x86 or execute 32 or execute single 32 or script exec 32, all of these components are not available any longer. The migration will automatically move process steps which are using them to their 64-bit version colleagues. 32-bit processes are not available any longer. If you have something developed which are using 32-bit steps, for example command shell or script execs, then you need to ensure that these commands are working with 64-bit versions of the same components as well. That could run into the one or the other trouble, especially if you use very old and classic software. But honestly, the majority of customers will not have problems with that, I'm sure. If we look at more end-of-life features, we will as well see that the Docker container image support for Windows Server 2016 ends. Reason for that is these containers are not .NET 8 compatible, and with that, the support is not longer available. Another thing is the PowerShell component, which ends as well. Don't start crying. What I'm talking about is the legacy PowerShell component. The PowerShell component Net8, which is the current PowerShell component of the Identity Manager, which supports PowerShell 7 and upper, that of course will continue and could be used. With the missing .NET Framework, there is also the Web Service Integration Wizard end of life. Web Service Integration Wizard was mainly and first time built to support SOAP-based web services and such, and it was generating with the help of the WSL exe specific code snippets. This Web Service Integration Wizard did not exist any longer. Everything that was created with that gets automatically converted, but needs of course double checked, especially because of the possible references necessary. Another thing which goes end of life is of course the simulation in the Identity Manager. Not the whole simulation, but parts of the simulation. And that is especially the part that has to do with a database queue steps and process tasks. Such things are not longer supported. That means changes out of calculation processes, inheritances, something like that, will not to be seen in the simulation any longer. This makes that simulation feature to a feature which is not that heavy than it was before. On the other hand side, everybody knows that especially the simulation in Identity Manager is something you should better not use in production because it is blocking your complete database. With that, I'm very sure that the .NET 8 change is not something that will harm too many people. However, it's only the half part of your simulation, because anything other else, processes, object changes and such, and this outcome will to be seen. Last but not least, let's have a look at the designer. You all know that feature. You are developing a process and designer. You want to test that process and you hit that local compilation button to get new assemblies created. This feature, of course, exists in Identity Manager 9.3. Additionally to that feature, and that is nearly nobody can remember, committing to the database was as well uploading these written local assembly files as well to the database. So in these cases, a database compilation was not necessary because the assembly was created in Designer for a specific process and uploaded to the database too. This upload of this specific single assemblies for that very specific table, this is not available any longer. Reason for that is the assembly is not available any longer. Now with .NET 8 we are just compiling everything at once, so these table-specific assemblies did not exist, and because of that the local compile feature can't at the end upload single small assembly DLLs to the database any longer. The process is like it was in the past nearly for everybody: change something in Designer, test it, as well with considering local compilations if necessary, but at the end, if you commit to the database, after committing to the database, the database compiler needs to be started to ensure that everything gets compiled. Last but not least, a feature that will be going end of life with the next Identity Manager version, and this is Windows Server 2012 support and 2012 R2 support. These things will be removed in Identity Manager version 10. In Identity Manager version 9.3 they are available. Some of this is already said, but again, if you want to migrate an Identity Manager version to version 9.3 and above, then there is something necessary to know. The first thing is automatically software update is not possible any longer. It will be possible from 9.3 to the next version, but to 9.3 you have to migrate everything manually, and that means you cannot rely on automatically software updates or automatically web application updates. Everything needs to be installed manually just for this version change. From a job server perspective, this means you have to upgrade every job server with a manual setup set. From a web application perspective, this means you need to newly install the application server and the API server and remove the old ones. This means two things. First of all, from an IIS perspective, all old application pools needs to be deleted. And secondly, you need to install the new prerequisites on a web server, which is the IIS ASP.NET hosting bundle for .NET 8. Once that is done, you can then use the installer like always and install application server first, an API server, and you thus have all the web fronts available. This means as well that everything web designer related is not working any longer and needs to be deinstalled. In this case, you can easily just throw that out of the ES configuration and remove all the application pools. There is no support for web designer content any longer. Use the HTML5 Angular-based portals instead. Additionally, with the use of .NET 8, the file global.log.config, which is a .NET Framework configuration file, did not exist any longer. Instead of that, please use the nlog.config file instead. This is what is as well shipped with the installation. Another thing that changed is the application name.exe.config file behavior. Application names.exe.config are files that could exist for each exe file in the past, but they are a .NET Framework feature. Something similar exists as well for .NET 8, but the naming is a little bit different. Now these files are named appsettings, name of the exe file, .json, and the format is now a JSON file. What happens to all of our SOAP-based web service clients if they are part of the Identity Manager installation. Again, the Identity Manager SOAP-based web client disappeared years ago. But I'm talking now about web services, SOAP-based, which are connected to the Identity Manager. What happens there is that the scripts which are helping with that are getting migrated automatically, but because that is only half part possible, that means all the references could not be considered. All of these scripts gets also deactivated during migration. What you now have to do is to add all the references manually into the code so that the new NuGet packages behavior could download them during the compilation process. Again, from a migration perspective, SOAP-based web services needs to be, of course, manually updated after migration. In the meantime, they will lead to any problems, especially because they are deactivated. Another thing you need to do, of course, is to upgrade the one or the other script you created during your customization phases in your projects. And this is again related to .NET 8 and, of course, the way how WinForms are used. There are many things to do. One thing is to replace all the different references which are somewhere in the code. You know, this is the stuff that starts with a hash in front of a script and contains references to different components. What is technically behind these references? Hash references is something we are using to let our compiler know that the stuff between the hash references tags is something that needs to be included into the compilation. That happens with .NET Framework in that first way, hash references, and these DLLs was analyzed and of course all necessary references was added. Now with .NET 8 the mechanism is a little bit different. You can use hash references, but that only will work if the DLL you reference doesn't have references to other DLLs which are not part of the Identity Manager installation yet. Because of that, you have now to convert all hash references into hash R, and in hash R tags you will then reference NuGet packages. The mechanism will be the same. If there are NuGet packages referenced, all referenced components, even if the components which are referenced does have its own references, will be analyzed and you will upload then to the database everything you need so that your implementation will work. And that means you have to convert all hash references in hash R. You can use hash references, but only then if you are 100% sure that the component you references doesn't have other references to other not referenced components. Another thing is that used WinForm components in scripts, for example, something like message boxes, busy blocks, input boxes, all of that stuff which is WinForm related needs to be converted as well. This is what you can see at the end on the right-hand side of the slide. You see that the handling of these different things is now a little bit different. To know is that anything that refers to VI dialog engine or system.windows.forms is not supported any longer. For all the project pros like I was in the past who just generated WinForms in a way of that they got, for example, wizard forms in the manager, clicking on a task or something else, this is of course possible as well. But for this, you have a difference to before where you just referenced the System Windows Forms class. You have now to build DLLs, and these DLLs needs to be uploaded to the systems as well. However, anything much easier, like for example busy blocks or message boxes, is something that could be used again, but in a little bit of different wording than before. You see examples again on the right side. All in all, we can say that with the move to .NET 8, especially custom scripts needs to be reviewed. The way how to do that is an easy way. You can just run the migration. If the compiler asks on an error on a script to deactivate that script, you can lock these scripts so that they are not part of the compilation process any longer. Later on, you can then just go to these scripts, correct them, ensure that they are now supporting .NET 8, and you can compile your database again. A helper script for that is available. That helper script is on your installation DVD. You see the path just down below here on the slide. The next thing I like to talk about is, of course, the PowerShell. I already told you that the PowerShell legacy component is now not longer available. The new PowerShell component, which is used instead, is our PowerShell component 4. And this PowerShell component 4, this supports PowerShell 7.4 and upper. We are happy to say that PowerShell 7.4 Plus is very good compatible with all the PowerShell scripts was developed before. Only in the one or the other seldom case, there are changes, and these changes needs then to be implemented in existing PowerShell commands or PowerShell scripts, typically in consideration with PowerShell commandlets, which are a little bit different organized. You see here two more URLs which show you the differences between PowerShell 5 and 7 and how to migrate best between PowerShell 5.1 and PowerShell 7 scripts.